On the 29th of January, 1960, an airplane that nobody in this country had ever seen before lifted off the concrete at Prague. 4 turboprop engines, a bare metal fuselage, 80 people in the cabin. The flight to Bratislava took 45 minutes. For the people watching that departure from the ground, 45 minutes was an almost indecent number. On the piston airliners that had been carrying passengers along the very same route, the trip took twice as long. The airplane was called the Il-18. Now take the same airfield, the same strip of runway, and roll the clock forward exactly 30 years. On the 29th of January, 1990, the last Il-18 of the Czechoslovak national carrier lifts off from that concrete at Ruzina. It is flying to Nuremberg, and in the cargo hold, it is carrying training material for a new wide-body airliner of European manufacture, an airplane the airline has only just ordered. A machine that spent 30 years on the line is carrying, on its final flight, the documentation for its own replacement. To the day, the 29th of January, and the 29th of January. Coincidences like that are usually the work of screenwriters. This one, nobody wrote. The 2 dates sit in different archives, recorded by different researchers, and they lined up entirely by accident. But it is a convenient frame for the story we are actually here for. Because 30 years is not a shelf life. 30 years is the lifespan of an entire engineering culture. Let me be clear at the outset, with no decorative inventions. This is not a story about how the airplane was built. Enough has been said about how it was built, and there is no point in repeating other people's words. This is a story about how it was flown, and, more to the point, about how it was flown in 2 places at once. Because the Il-18 did not go only to Prague. Almost simultaneously, with a gap of a little over a year, identical machines went to the Polish national airline. The same factory, the same type, the same 4 engines, the same wing section, the same set of documentation, delivered out of the same design bureau in Moscow. 2 neighboring states, 2 capitals about 320 miles apart, that is, a little over 500 kilometers, and 2 engineering organizations that grew up in more or less identical conditions. And this is where the reason to stay to the end begins. Over 30 years of operation, the Czechoslovak airline lost 4 Il-18s, 237 people. Over 30 years of operation, the Polish airline lost none. 0. 1 type, 1 set of manuals, 1 manufacturer, 1 and the same overhaul cycle. Heavy maintenance was handed by both carriers to the Soviet Union, to the designer, and completely different outcomes. The temptation to explain that simply is enormous. Somebody will say the Poles simply maintained their aircraft better. Somebody else will object that the Czechs were unlucky with their route network. A third voice will wave the whole thing away as statistics on small numbers, because 10 airframes against 12 is not a sample. It is an anecdote. And all 3 will be partly right, and none of them will be right all the way down. The real answer turns out to be less comfortable than any of those 3, and getting to it takes a while. It runs through cabin layouts, which both carriers reworked to suit themselves, through the maintenance regulations, where, as we will see, there was no difference whatsoever, not down to a single letter, through route networks that led one airline into West Africa and Cuba, and the other into Kraków and Rzeszów. Through one evening on a lake outside Bratislava, and one morning above a mountain in the Beskids. And through one more airplane, an airplane that exists in this story on only one side of the border. Because alongside the Il-18, the Polish carrier operated a second Soviet machine, the small turboprop AN-24, the backbone of every domestic route in the country for nearly 26 years. The Czechoslovak carrier did not. Never. Not a single airframe. And the reason it was not there tells you more about these two schools of operation than almost everything else combined. So the question we are working toward runs something like this. The Il-18 in Prague and the Il-18 in Warsaw, are those one airplane or two different airplanes? And who actually manufactured reliability? The engineer in Moscow who drew the wing spar? Or the people on the ground in the hangars at Ruzina and Oketcha who spent 30 years deciding what to do with that spar next? I am not going to answer yet. It is far too early. First, we have to work out how these airplanes ended up in Prague and Warsaw at all, and why the people who owned them had almost no choice in the matter. To understand why this particular airplane ended up in Prague and in Warsaw, you first have to understand what neither airline had. They did not have money. Or rather, they had money, but not the kind that was any use. In 1964, the Economic Union of the Socialist States introduced an accounting unit called the transferable ruble. The academic literature describes it in dry and merciless terms. The transferable ruble was not convertible into national currencies, it was not convertible into Western currencies, and it could not be freely exchanged for goods and services. Which meant an airline could accumulate a positive balance in mutual trade for years on end and could not buy a single thing with it outside the block. Not an airplane, not a spare turbine, not even a set of wheels. This is not ideology. This is bookkeeping, and it explains 9/10 of everything that follows. But there was also the part that bookkeeping does not explain. Prague occupied a special place inside that system. At the end of 1957, the Czechoslovak carrier ČSA, known in English as Czechoslovak Airlines, put the jet-powered Tu-104 into scheduled service, and, as Czech aviation historians write, became the second state in the world to operate jet airliners on a timetable. The Prague to Moscow route became the first fully jet international air link on the planet. For Moscow, that was an investment in a shop window. Look, our equipment does not only fly at home. A shop window needs upkeep, and along with the Tu-104, what traveled to Czechoslovakia was not only airframes, but training. From June to November of 1957, the crews studied in the Soviet Union, theory plus practical flying on active Aeroflot routes, plus acceptance of the aircraft at the factory. The first group was roughly 10 pilots, 5 navigators, and support staff. And then something happens that we are going to need later. The specialists of the Czechoslovak airline themselves designed and installed modifications to the Tu-104, navigation equipment, emergency equipment, cockpit arrangement, all brought into line with the requirements of the International Civil Aviation Organization. Not the factory, not the design bureau. They did it themselves. Hold on to that episode. It will remain the single documented case of its kind in this entire story. Warsaw took a different road. In 1957, the Polish carrier, LOT Polish Airlines, bought 5 American Convairs, and in 1962, it bought 3 second-hand British Vickers Viscounts from a private operator. And here, the Polish sources preserved a detail that is worth 10 essays about the period. The Viscounts arrived without weather radar, because the authorities did not want to pay for that equipment. And beyond that, the airline's management seriously feared that pilots sent to Britain for type conversion would not come back, and as a precaution, temporarily expanded the crews to 3, even though the airplane was certified to fly with 2. 3 men instead of 2, not on safety grounds, on the arithmetic of the probability that somebody would fail to return. The Convairs were withdrawn from service in 1965, and not because they flew badly. They were withdrawn because their spare parts had to be bought with exactly the currency nobody had. And with that, Western equipment disappeared from the Polish fleet for more than 20 years. And in 1966, the An-24 took its place. In Czechoslovakia, things fell out a third way. In the late 60s, the management of the Prague airline put together an entire proposal to lease 6 French Caravelles at $44,835 per month per aircraft. In that same archival document, published today, the company's own fleet is described, in so many words, as technically, and above all, morally obsolete. The people writing that memo understood perfectly well what they were flying. The deal did not happen. The document does not state the reason, and I am not going to invent one. Fleet renewal after that dragged on almost to the middle of the 70s. What Czechoslovakia did have, and Poland did not, was its own aircraft industry, building airliners. Not license-built fighters, its own designs. The small L410 turboprop, which later spread across the entire socialist bloc, and of which around 500 were flying in the Soviet Union alone by the mid-80s. And here is the detail that overturns the familiar picture of the Eastern Bloc as a closed, self-sufficient system. The Czech engine intended for that airplane was not ready in time. The early production run had to be built with Canadian Pratt & Whitney engines instead. The Czech source puts it without any diplomacy at all. The country was existentially dependent on imports of specialized machine-building technology from capitalist states. The self-sufficient bloc was buying its engines from Canada. It simply did not make the newspapers. That is how the board was set. Prague received its first 2 Il-18s on the 8th of January, 1960, and the first of them was not new. It had previously flown for Aeroflot. Warsaw received its aircraft in March of 1961, and on the 24th of May, the airframe, named Warsaw, flew the first revenue service. To Moscow, naturally. Somewhere around 700 of these airplanes were built in total. There is no exact figure. Estimates run from 600 to 800, and this is one of those cases where admitting the spread is more honest than picking a pretty number. After that, both airlines started doing whatever they thought best with these machines. And from this point forward, they stop being identical. There is a simple way to find out what an airline thinks of itself. Look at what it names its airplanes. The Czechoslovak Il-18s carried the names of spa towns: Karlovy Vary, Mariánské Lázně, Poděbrady, the High Tatras, Sliak, Piastany. 2 more airframes were named for cities, Ostrava and Košice, but the register was set by the spas. Mineral springs, sanatoriums, quiet, treatment. The airplane as a continuation of a pleasant trip. The Polish Il-18s carried the names of battles: Westerplatte, Narvik, Tobruk, Falaise, Monte Cassino, Kolobszeg, Lenino. One airframe was named Warsaw, but the other 7 were named for engagements in which men died. Both airlines flew the same machine. One of them saw a road to the waters. The other saw memory. The Polish list is worth a closer look because it is less uniform than it appears. Narvik, Tobruk, Falaise, Monte Cassino. That is the Western Front, the places where Polish formations fought as part of the Allied armies. Lenino is the Eastern Front. Those names hung on the fuselages simultaneously in the same fleet, in the same years. I am not going to comment on that. It is enough that it was so. Now let us look inside. The cabin of the Czechoslovak Il-18 in the B version is described in the sources in detail. Forward cabin, entry doors, galley, main cabin, aft galley, aft doors, rear cabin. 2 galleys, 2 cabins. 84 seats in an airframe whose factory layout allowed for more than 100. That is not a configuration for mass transport. That is a configuration for a flight that is itself an occasion. 84 people in an airplane that size is roughly what you would get if you took an inner-city coach with 40 seats, installed 30, and hung curtains in the windows. Now Warsaw. The Polish machines arrived configured for 87 seats, and all 87 were classed as first class. 87 first-class seats on one airplane. No economy, no tourist class. First only. And then, real life began. First, the cabins were reworked to 99 economy seats. Then, the entire fleet was standardized at 105. Within a few years, the airplane traveled the whole distance from an exhibit of national prestige to an ordinary mover of human beings. And the numbers record that journey more precisely than any memoir. 87, 99, 105. And here comes the detail that matters to our subject more than all those seats put together. The Polish cabin conversions were not done in Poland. The Polish source describes it plainly. During overhauls, meaning those same scheduled factory overhauls carried out in the Soviet Union, the aircraft had their avionics and instrument panels replaced to meet new requirements, and new antennas fitted to the fuselage. Modernization to changing standards happened inside the Soviet overhaul cycle, not in a hangar at Okęcie. In a shop more than 600 miles from Warsaw. That is more than 1,000 kilometers. Compare that with what we have already seen. The specialists of the Prague airline, 10 years earlier, designing modifications to the Tu-104 themselves to satisfy international requirements. The same block, the same dependence on the same supplier, and 2 different answers to the question of who exactly is the engineer here. Although, in fairness, those are different types, different years, and different circumstances. You cannot build a pattern out of 2 episodes, but both are worth remembering. They will meet again. Next, the routes, because the cabin is built for the route. The Prague 1L-18S flew to West Africa. Prague, Zurich, Rabat, Dakar, Conakry. And eastward, Prague, Athens, Damascus, Baghdad. The extended range version worked the Cuba run, by way of Shannon in Ireland and Gander in Newfoundland, with 2 refueling stops around the ocean. Add a European network, and add domestic flights to Bratislava and Košice. The Polish Il-18s also carried their airline beyond Europe. This was the type that first took the carrier into the Middle East and North Africa. Cairo, Baghdad, Beirut, Benghazi, Damascus, Tunis, plus London, Paris, Amsterdam, Copenhagen, Hamburg, Brussels, Munich. They did not cross the ocean. Warsaw opened its transatlantic service later, and on a different airplane. But the most eloquent figure of all survived not in a timetable, but in one aircraft's logbook. A Czechoslovak Il-18 of the D version, over 17 years of service, logged 23,500 hours and completed 20,829 landings. Divide one by the other. The average flight lasted 1 hour and 8 minutes. 1 hour and 8 minutes. A long-range airplane with oceanic legs in it, designed to move people across continents, spent its entire working life on short hops, taking off and landing 3 or 4 times a day. In the second half of the 70s, Warsaw went a step further. 2 Il-18s had their seats stripped out and enlarged cargo doors cut into the fuselage. The passenger liner became a freighter. By the end of their service life, the Polish fleet was working mostly cargo. That is how both airlines rewrote this machine to suit themselves. In different directions, but both of them passed recognition. What they could not rewrite is something we have not touched yet. When you set out to compare 2 schools of operation, you expect to find different rules, different inspection intervals, different tolerances, local service bulletins, national supplements to the manufacturer's manual. Something along the lines of, in Prague they checked it every 200 hours, and in Warsaw every 300. I looked for that for several days. I found nothing. And that absence is the single most substantive result of the entire investigation. Because it means something you have to accept whole. The rules were identical, down to the letter. Look at how the system was built. The maintenance regulations laid out the work by forms. Form A1, before flight and after flight. Form A2, every 10 to 20 flight hours. Form FB, every 100 hours, and in any case no less often than once every 30 days. Then came the periodic forms. The base cycle, every 300 flight hours or 6 months of service, and after that, in escalating steps. 600 hours, 900, 1,200, 1,500, and onward up to 3,500. Pay attention to the word or. 300 hours or 6 months, whichever comes first. An airplane that sat in a hangar for half a year and never moved an inch still went in for scheduled work. And underneath all of it lay one sentence, and it deserves to be quoted exactly as written. The full cycle of periodic maintenance is equal to the period of operation between overhauls. Think about what that means in practice. The work calendar is tied rigidly not to the condition of the individual airplane, but to the time remaining until its next major overhaul. Not, we looked at it, we assessed it, we decided. But, this many hours have elapsed, therefore, we perform the following. A system built on predictability rather than on judgment. It has an obvious virtue. It does not depend on how clever and how attentive the man holding the wrench happens to be. It works even where the qualification of the personnel is low, and that is its enormous strength. It is precisely why Soviet equipment survived in places where Western equipment would not have survived at all. And it has a flip side, which is the reason all of this is being told. It leaves the operator almost no room for a decision of its own. The regulations were drafted in Kiev and coordinated with the manufacturers of the airframe and the engines. Factory service bulletins were part of the normative base on equal footing with the document itself. None of this was written in Prague or in Warsaw. Let me be honest about one thing. I did not find any explicit prohibition on deviating from the intervals in the text of the regulations. And I am not going to attribute to a document something it does not say. But the overall architecture is unmistakable. The instructions arrived from above, and they arrived complete. Now, who carried those instructions all the way through? Heavy maintenance was handed to the Soviet Union by both carriers. The Polish Il-18S went through major overhaul in Moscow, at the plant attached to Bykovo airfield. Prague sent its long-haul aircraft to Tashkent for general overhaul. Though here, I am obliged to note that the documented case concerns a different type, the Il-62, and not the Il-18. But the model of the practice is the same. And now, the most interesting part. Proof by absence. The official histories of the Czechoslovak and Slovak aircraft repair enterprises at Trenčín, at Kabeli, at Malesice list what they were capable of. Helicopters, fighters, trainers, that same L410. 3 independent sources. And in not one of them is there any mention of the IL-18, or the AN-24, or the AI-20 and AI-24 engines. A consistent absence across 3 independent listings is not proof in the strict sense, but it is a very strong indication. Civil major overhaul of these machines was not something Czechoslovak industry performed. In Poland, the picture is even sharper. The AI-20 and AI-24 engines were not manufactured in the country, and no license for them existed. Not one Polish aircraft repair plant, whose catalog could be checked, lists those engines. Which means that neither country touched the heart of the airplane at all. Not one, not the other. And that heart was not a simple thing. The first production batches of the AI-20 engine had a service life of 100 hours. 100. The cause was burn-through of the combustion chamber and the fire that followed. The chamber and the injection system were later reworked. Reliability improved dramatically, and on the late variants, the interval between overhauls reached roughly 6,000 hours. The overhaul period, which started at 600 hours, was eventually stretched to 2,000. But the first years of operation in Prague fell exactly on those 100 hours. That is worth remembering when we get to 1961. And the last item in this chapter is a figure showing that under identical rules, the airplanes nevertheless worked very differently. The average annual utilization of a single IL-18 at the Polish airline ran from 1,600 to 1,800 hours. The airframe, named Kolobrzeg, logged almost 32,000 hours in its lifetime, covered 19 million kilometers, which is about 12 million miles, and completed 28,000 takeoffs and landings. 12 million miles is roughly 25 round trips to the moon on one airplane. With 28,000 landings, every one of them a load cycle on the structure. The rules were the same. The workload was not. And neither were the decisions made in the cockpit. Working out where that led has to be done separately for each of them. We start with Prague, because Prague paid first. 1961 was the worst year in the history of the Prague airline. It lost 2 Il-18s in 3.5 months on the same route. On the 28th of March, an airframe with a registration beginning OK-O was operating Flight 511, Prague, Zurich, Rabat, Dakar, Conakry. The West African run, long, multi-stop, exactly the kind of service you buy a 4-engine airplane for in the first place. It never reached Africa. It broke up in flight over Bavaria, not far from Nuremberg. All 52 people on board were killed. The cause has to be discussed carefully, and here's why. The German Commission worded its conclusion as pilot error or autopilot failure. In other sources, the same accident is described as structural failure. There is also a third version of Soviet origin, which I am not going to repeat. It appears without a single reference to any document, and things like that do not belong on camera. 3 mutually incompatible formulations for one event. To this day, there is no single established cause for that crash. On the 12th of July, 3.5 months later, the same Flight 511, a different airframe, Morocco, in a version that appears in Czech sources, heavy fog at Rabat sent the aircraft to its alternate at Casablanca, and it crashed on the approach. All 72 people on board were killed. Here, too, the cause was never officially established. 2 airplanes, 124 people, 1 route, 1 year. And here I have to say something that excuses nobody, but without which the picture is dishonest. Remember the service life of those early engines? 100 hours? Prague received its first machines in January of 1960. By March of 1961, that fleet was a little over a year old. Crews were learning equipment of which very few examples existed anywhere in the world. The maintenance and operational infrastructure behind it was only being assembled. The design itself was still in the phase where defects are found not on a test stand, but in flight. And they were flying it hard from the first day, not on a Prague to Brno shuttle, but across the Mediterranean into West Africa, where the airfields, the weather services, and the radio communications were exactly what they were in the early 60s. This is not a mitigating circumstance. It is a description of the conditions in which people worked, people whose names most of the sources did not even preserve. Then came a pause. 6 years without a loss. And then came the 5th of September, 1967. Flight 523 was running from Prague to Havana, Shannon in Ireland, Gander in Newfoundland, refuel, ocean. The airplane was the extended range version, the newest in the fleet. Total time on the airframe, 766 hours, essentially factory fresh. The captain was 52 years old, with more than 17,000 hours of total flying time behind him, of which more than 5,000 were on this type. The first officer had more than 10,000. These were not beginners. By the standards of any airline anywhere in the world, this was a very experienced crew. The airplane went down immediately after takeoff from Gander. Of the 69 people on board, 37 were killed. 32 survived. The cause was never established. Several theories were discussed, and the sources mention a suggestion that the wing flaps were extended prematurely, but none of them ever became the official finding. Both Czechoslovak and Soviet specialists took part in the investigation, including an engineer from the Ilyushin Design Bureau and a well-known Czech pilot of the wartime generation. It produced no answer. There is one detail in this story I cannot skip, even though it explains nothing technically. The report records that the airplane was overloaded by 119 kilograms. That is about 260 pounds. 260 pounds on an airplane with a takeoff weight of about 141,000 pounds, which is 64 metric tons, is less than 0.2%. It is one passenger with a suitcase. It could not possibly have influenced the outcome, and nobody claims otherwise. But the simple fact that the overload was calculated and written down to the last kilogram says more about the culture of that investigation than any of its conclusions. These people were working seriously. And one more thing. The rescue effort at Gander was carried out by local residents, fishermen, firefighters, airfield staff. In gratitude, the government of Czechoslovakia gave Newfoundland its own pavilion from the World Exposition in Montreal. It was reassembled on Canadian soil and opened a few years later. 37 people never came home. And somewhere in Newfoundland, a building still stands, put there because 32 of them were pulled out alive. After 1967 came a long silence. For 9 years, the Prague airline did not lose a single Il-18. The fleet stabilized. The engines reached a normal service life. The crews accumulated experience. The route network became routine. 3 crashes in the first 8 years, and then 9 years without one. That no longer looks like a bad airplane. It looks like a learning curve, terrifyingly steep at the start and nearly flat afterward. There will be a 4th crash, but it happens in 1976 on a fully mature airplane on a domestic route lasting less than an hour, and that is exactly why we will take it apart separately and in detail. It is the central point of this entire story. For now, let us cross the border, because in Warsaw, in those same years, something quite different was happening, and what they paid for there was something else entirely. There is an airplane in this story that exists on only one side of the border. The Il-18, a small turboprop carrying a little over 40 passengers, arrived at the Polish airline in March of 1966. Around 20 of them were acquired in total, including aircraft handed over from the Air Force. And for the next 26 years, this was the principal airplane on every domestic route in the country. Not one of several, the principal one. In Czechoslovakia, it never existed in civil aviation. Not a single airframe. I checked that against 3 independent listings of the Prague Airlines fleet, and the type is absent from all of them. Il-24s did fly in Czechoslovakia, but only with the military. 6 aircraft, delivered between March of 1967 and September of 1971. The first group of 11 men trained on them in the Soviet Union over the winter of 1966 and 1967. Theory in Kiev, practical flying in Simferopol. On the 3rd of March, 1967, the first 2 airplanes landed at a military airfield outside Prague. And that is all. The type never once appeared in a Czechoslovak timetable. The reason is probably simple, although nobody ever committed it to paper. Czechoslovakia had no need for a Soviet-built regional airliner. It had its own. That same small L410 turboprop built at Kunovice, which later spread across the whole block. Why buy somebody else's when yours is already on the assembly line? Poland had no regional airliner of its own. And that is not a question of ambition. It is a question of how work was divided up inside the socialist bloc. Poland built other people's designs under license, and did so on a scale that is genuinely staggering. Of one light biplane alone, the plant at Mielec turned out nearly 12,000 examples, and roughly 9 out of 10 went to the Soviet Union. The country functioned as an enormous workshop. But a workshop designed around somebody else's requirements. So it happened that in 1965, Warsaw withdrew its last Western airplanes from service, and in 1966, the An-24 took their place, a chronological rhyme that nobody planned. These machines were given the names of rivers: Wisla, Wisloka, Dunajec, Odra, Poprad, Nocek, Drava. Not spa towns, not battles. Rivers. Something domestic, internal, running through your own country. The network matched. Warsaw, Gdansk, Kraków, Wrocław, Poznan, Szczecin, Koszalin, Słupsk, Rzeszów. 44 to 52 seats, 2 plus 2 abreast, flights of an hour or less. This airplane replaced the piston machines of the 40s and became, for an entire generation of Poles, simply the way you got from one city to another. And this is where Warsaw paid its price. The 2nd of April, 1969, Flight 165, Warsaw to Kraków. Scheduled block time, 55 minutes. Departure at 20 minutes past 3 in the afternoon. The airframe was SPLTF, 2 years in service. The last transmission from the airplane broke off in the middle. Left turn onto the outer. At 8 minutes past 4, the aircraft struck the northern slope of Mount Polica in the Beskids, 4,490 feet high, that is 1,369 meters. It cut a swath about 650 feet long, roughly 200 meters, through 300-year-old forest. All 53 people aboard were killed, among them the linguist Professor Zenon Klemensevitz. Now, what the investigation established, because for our subject, this is the key chapter. The airplane was serviceable. Not one finding points to a technical failure. The crew lost positional awareness after passing the radio beacon and homed on a different navigation beacon instead of flying the published approach. The controller lost the aircraft's return in a blind sector of the radar, and there is a separate item on the record. The radar installed at the airport was marine equipment adapted to aviation use, and it did not meet the airport's requirements. A marine radar at the airport of a regional capital in 1969. The airplane we are talking about has nothing to do with any of this. It was serviceable, it was new, it did precisely what it was told to do. What failed was not the machine, and not, in the first instance, the cockpit. What failed was the ground. And now comes the part I will retell without a single adjective, because it does not need any. The official report appeared in 1970 and laid the blame on the captain. Loss of positional awareness. The report did not explain how the airplane came to be about 30 miles beyond its destination, that is roughly 50 kilometers. A second commission found responsibility to be shared because the crew was not navigating on its own, and the ground services played their part. 4 airport employees were charged. In July of 1969, they were covered by an amnesty. July of 1969 is 6 months before the official report was published. A substantial part of the case file was still classified 25 years later. One more episode, exactly 12 years afterward, shows the same theme from the opposite side. On the 26th of March, 1981, the airframe named Drawa on the Warsaw to Słupsk service struck trees about 650 feet short of the runway, roughly 200 meters. One passenger was killed. The commission, chaired by a military specialist, found not a single defect in the airplane and noted separately that the radio navigation services, the radar coverage, and air traffic control had all performed flawlessly. The cause was an incorrect setting or an incorrect reading of the altimeter. In 1969, the ground failed, and the crew was named as the guilty party. In 1981, the ground performed cleanly, and the error really was in the cockpit. Between those two dates lie 12 years in which the country learned to build proper airports and learned to call things by their right names, at least in the reports. But there was one more kind of load on the Polish An-24s, a load no airplane west of the Oder ever had to carry. No maintenance manual anywhere contains a section on what to do when somebody produces a hand grenade in the cabin. And yet, for Polish crews, that was part of the job, a regular part. From the late 60s to the early 80s, a wave of hijackings ran through Polish civil aviation. Few airlines in Eastern Europe went through anything comparable, and the primary target was the An-24. Small domestic flights, short legs, a full cabin, and 20 minutes of flying time to the western frontier. The list takes up more space than one would like. October of 1969, an Il-18 landing in West Berlin. June of 1970, an An-24, Copenhagen. August of 1970, an An-24, East Berlin. 3 weeks later, another An-24, a demand to fly to Austria, an explosion on board, and the man who set it off lost a hand and an eye, and then received 25 years. Then come the 80s, and there it turns into something close to impossible. An airframe whose registration ended in TB was hijacked twice. The first time in December of 1980. One man, a landing in West Berlin, 4 years in prison. The second time, on the 10th of January 1981, 5 weeks later, the Katowice to Warsaw service. 4 men with dynamite. The same airplane, 5 weeks apart. But the record was set by a different airframe. In the summer of 1981, 3 attempts were made to seize it in a single month. The 21st of July failed. The 5th of August failed. The 22nd of August, Flight 702, Wrocław to Warsaw, 39 passengers and 4 crew, threatened with a grenade. The airplane landed in West Berlin. Every passenger was released. Nobody was hurt. The organizer surrendered and requested asylum, and the court gave him 5.5 years. And now, the detail that moves this whole story into another genre entirely. A few years later, an episode of a Polish television series was made based on that hijacking, and it was filmed aboard that very airplane. The machine played itself. The Prague airline had nothing on that scale. It had one incident. An Il-18 was hijacked from the domestic Prague to Bratislava service to Munich in the middle of the 70s, and there were no casualties. And that, broadly, is the whole list. The difference is explained by geography and politics, not by the quality of security screening. Poland had an extensive domestic network of short flights, and West Berlin, an enclave sitting in the middle of somebody else's territory, an airfield you could reach on full tanks in a matter of minutes. Czechoslovakia had no such enclave next door. Here, something needs to be said plainly and once, so we do not have to come back to it. The people who did this were committing a crime and putting dozens of uninvolved strangers in mortal danger. Not one of these hijackings was a harmless adventure, and in several cases, the passengers and crew survived purely by luck. There is no romance in it, and at the same time, something else is true. For a person with no passport and no lawful way whatsoever to leave, the airplane was the only door. Not the most convenient one, not the safest one, and appallingly expensive for everyone around him, but the only one. That is not a justification. It is a description of a system in which that arithmetic became possible in the first place. And now, the reason this chapter is here at all. What all of it did to the operation of the aircraft. Crews who were being trained for engine failures and approaches in marginal weather acquired one more scenario, a scenario nobody had prepared them for, and which appeared in no manufacturer's manual anywhere. The decision whether to comply or to resist was made in seconds, without any doctrine at all, by each captain from scratch. After martial law was declared in December of 1981, at least 2 armed security officers were carried on flights at all times. That changed everything at once. The weight and balance calculation, the psychology of the cabin, the behavior of the flight attendants. An airplane designed as a means of transport became simultaneously an object under guard, and no maintenance regulation accounted for that in any way. And here we come back to the central question of this whole film. We have already seen that the paperwork in Prague and in Warsaw was identical. Maintenance forms, intervals, major overhaul at the manufacturer, letter for letter, the same. But operating an airplane is not paperwork. Operating an airplane is what actually happens to it every day in the real world. And in the real world, the biography of the Polish An-24 fleet includes hijackings, an explosion on board, armed guards in the cabin, and landings at airfields that were not on the flight plan. The biography of the Czechoslovak Il-18 fleet includes ocean crossings with 2 refueling stops, African airfields, and a service to Havana, and both of them include hundreds of short domestic sectors where the airplane took off and landed 4 times a day. One set of documentation, 3 completely different lives. And at a certain moment, the gap between the documentation and the life becomes critical. Not gradually, instantly. It happened on the 28th of July, 1976, on a summer evening over a lake 15 minutes flying time from Bratislava. A few minutes in which everything we have discussed so far converged on a single point. Flight number 1. That is literally what it was called. CSA 001, Prague to Bratislava. A domestic route under an hour long, the most ordinary work this airline had been doing several times a day for 16 years. The 28th of July, 1976. The airframe carried the name Košice. It was one of the first pair delivered in January of 1960, which is to say, it was the very airplane with which all of this had begun in that country. 79 people on board. The crew: Captain Svatoslav Rosa, First Officer Yuri Ruzicka, Navigator Antonin Prim, Flight Engineer Yaroslav Schmidt. I am naming all 4 of them now at the start because what follows is an account of their mistakes, and it matters to me that by the time we get there, they are already people to you and not job titles. Now in order, the way the Commission reconstructed it. Link 1. The controller passed the crew a distance to the airfield of 44 kilometers, about 27 miles. The actual distance remaining to the runway was 29 kilometers, about 18 miles, an error of roughly 9 miles. The crew builds its descent on the assumption that it has margin it does not in fact have. By the time the discrepancy becomes obvious, the airplane is too high and too close. Then comes the fork in the road, and that is where it was decided. There is an entirely routine way out of that situation. Go around, lose a few minutes, fly the approach again, land. That is what is taught everywhere, always, and nobody is punished for it. The captain chose otherwise. He went for a forced descent. All 4 engines brought back essentially to idle, the rate of descent reaching 22 meters per second, about 4,300 feet per minute, against a recommended 10 to 15 meters per second, which is roughly 2,000 to 3,000 feet per minute. 4,300 feet a minute is well over half a mile of altitude every 60 seconds. The airplane is falling while remaining fully controllable, and the altimeter needle is sweeping like a second hand. Link 3. In that condition, a warning goes off. A problem with engine number 3. And here comes the moment for which this entire chapter was written. The flight engineer feathered the wrong engine. Instead of the faulty number 3, he manually shut down number 4. Engines 3 and 4 are the right wing. Both of them. The entire right side was left without thrust. Link 4. The captain begins a go-around, and now he has no choice about it. Altitude, about 40 meters. That is roughly 130 feet. 130 feet. The height of a 12-story building. On an airplane with 2 engines running out of 4, and both of them on the same side. Link 5, the last one. An attempt is made to restart the feathered engine. Contrary to procedure, because at that speed and that altitude, it must not be done. The blades come out of the feathered position, drag on the right side rises sharply, the airplane rolls uncontrollably to the right and falls into Lake Zlate Pieski on the outskirts of Bratislava. Of the 79 people on board, 76 were killed. Roughly 20 seconds before impact, the flight recorder captured a line from the flight engineer. 5 words in Czech. It was number 4, wasn't it? In the original, it is a short, everyday question, the kind you use to confirm a detail in conversation. There is no panic in it, and no shouting. 20 seconds before his own death, a man understood exactly what had happened. Now let us look at that list one more time and try to find in it a single word about the design of the airplane. An error in the distance passed to the crew. The decision to force the descent instead of going around. The failed engine, misidentified. A go-around initiated from 130 feet. A feathered engine restarted contrary to the manual. No spar. No fatigue crack. No hydraulic failure. Not one defect in the airframe. The machine did precisely what was demanded of it. It even remained controllable right up to the final link in the chain. The roll arrived only after number 4 was restarted. One of the specialists who examined this accident summed it up this way: any single one of those errors would have been survivable. Together, they proved catastrophic. And that is the precise answer to the question this whole film is built around. The maintenance regulations had nothing whatsoever to do with that evening. The forms, the intervals, the major overhaul at Bikovo or at Tashkent, all of it had been carried out impeccably. The airplane was technically serviceable. And then, 4 men in a cockpit made 5 decisions in a matter of minutes, each of which, on its own, would have meant nothing at all. Theories grew up around this crash later. An engine fire, a claim that the crew was refused an emergency landing at an alternate because some delegation was arriving. Checking showed that no delegation was there at the time, and that the testimony of a surviving passenger does not match the failures actually recorded. The theories remained theories. But here is what genuinely changed. Following the investigation, the airline introduced simulator training for its crews to practice emergency procedures. I found that fact in a single source, and I am obliged to say so. But if it is correct, and everything points to its being correct, then it is the only documented change to the system of operation produced by any of the accidents we have discussed today. Not a new factory service bulletin, not a shortened inspection interval, not a reinforced frame. A simulator. The one place where a mistake costs nothing. And here begins the strangest part of this story. Because after the 28th of July, 1976, the Czechoslovak airline never lost another passenger flight. Not one. Ever. The 2nd of November, 1988. Flight 703, Warsaw to Rzeszów. The airframe named Dunajec, an AN-24, 22 years in service. The crew. Captain Kazimierz Rozek, 30 years of flying behind him. First Officer Waldemar Wolski. Flight Mechanic Marek Lubicz Nowicki. Flight Attendant Elżbieta Ziklinska. 29 people on board, counting all of them. About 40 minutes into the flight, at 25 minutes past 10, both engines failed. The cause established by the Commission: the engine intakes had iced over. The anti-icing system was not switched on in time. Once the engines stopped, restarting them was no longer possible. After that, most of the electrical system shut down. Contact with the ground was lost. An airplane with 2 dead propellers was descending over the Polish plain about 20 miles from its destination airport, roughly 30-odd kilometers. Rozek put it down in a meadow near the village of Białobrzegi. On its belly, gear up. The machine slid several hundred yards, breaking up as it went, then caught fire, and then the tanks exploded. Of the 29 people on board, 1 was killed. 69-year-old Weronika Szwed, trapped between crushed seats. 12 were injured. 28 people walked out of an airplane in which nothing at all was working. That was the last crash of the Polish airline. And the last fatal crash in Polish civil aviation. Full stop. 37 years have passed since. And now let us put all of it together. It is time to answer the question this was all built around. We started with a figure that reads like a verdict. 4 IL-18s lost in Prague, none in Warsaw. One type, one factory, one overhaul cycle, one manual. Well then, 4-0 is not a scoreline. It is two different jobs performed by one and the same airplane. Prague flew this machine to Conakry, to Dakar, to Havana by way of Gander, into airfields where the weather services and the navigation aids of the early 60s were exactly what they were. And it flew it from the very first days, when the engine still had a service life of 100 hours and nobody anywhere in the world had any operational experience with the type. Warsaw flew its Il-18s to Cairo and Beirut, but handed the great mass of short domestic sectors to a different airplane, the AN-24. And that is precisely where it paid. 53 people on a mountain outside Krakow. One person outside Słupsk. One woman outside Rzeszów. Which gives Warsaw, across all the types we have discussed, 55 dead. Prague, on the Il-18, 237. The difference is real, and it is enormous. But it lies almost entirely in two episodes. 1961, when the world at large did not yet know how to operate this type at all. In 1976, when 4 experienced men made 5 wrong decisions in a row in a matter of minutes. Take 1961 out, and the two pictures diverge far less dramatically. You cannot take it out, of course. But understanding what a number is made of is mandatory. Otherwise, the number lies to you. And now, the answer. The regulations were one and the same. Maintenance forms, intervals, the tie to the overhaul cycle, major overhaul at the manufacturer. Letter for letter identical in Prague and in Warsaw. No local service bulletins, no national tolerances, no "we inspect more often." I went looking, and I found nothing of the kind. The difference did not arise in the documents. It arose where the documents run out. In who operated this machine, and on which routes. In what the ground infrastructure was like, and the marine radar at the Krakow airport stands here as a monument to that thought. In what the crews were taught, and on what equipment they were taught it. And in what the human being in the seat decides in the last minutes before the ground, when the manual says one thing and the situation demands that he decide for himself. Reliability turned out not to be a property of metal. It turned out to be a property of an organization. The proof of that is as strong as anything one could imagine, and it does not require a single new number. The metal did not change. The Il-18 of 1977 was exactly the same airplane as the Il-18 of 1976. The AN-24 of 1989 was exactly the same as the AN-24 of 1988. Not one design modification followed from any of these accidents, and the crashes stopped. At both airlines. Permanently. Prague, after 1976, never lost another passenger flight. Warsaw, after 1988, never lost one either. What changed was not the airplanes. What changed were the people, the procedures, and the simulators. There is an unpleasant side to this thought as well, and it is more honest to say it out loud. In the mid-70s, the Polish authorities judged the cost of scheduled engine overhauls, which only the manufacturing plant in the Soviet Union could perform, to be unjustifiably high and economized on them. That concerned a different type, not the Il-18, and I am obliged to say so. But the mechanism is instructive. Where an organization decides to economize on maintenance, the regulations are powerless. They are written for people who intend to comply with them. And one last item, for scale. The turboprop generation was dangerous everywhere, not only in the East. The British Bristol Britannia, 85 aircraft of home construction, 14 lost. The Vickers Vanguard, 44 aircraft, 5 or 6 lost. And the American Lockheed L-188 Electra, 170 aircraft built, 58 written off. Approximately 1/3 of the entire fleet. 1/3 of the fleet. On an airplane built in the country with the most developed aviation industry in the world, flown by carriers with money, with infrastructure, and with training programs. Roughly 1 airframe in 3 did not survive its own service life. That is not a Soviet figure, and it is not an Eastern European figure. It is the price everybody paid for learning what a large turboprop airliner actually does when it is pushed. There is no comparable aggregate figure for the Il-18 in reliable sources, and I am not going to substitute one by eye. But the general conclusion does not change because of that. The 1960s taught everybody, and the tuition was equally expensive everywhere. What is left is to find out what became of these airplanes afterward. And that is where the most unexpected part of all is waiting for us. Airplanes rarely die beautifully. Usually, they are simply cut up. But with these 2 fleets, it worked out differently, and what became of them tells you more about the 2 countries than any statistic. We start with Prague. The first airframe, the one that arrived on the 8th of January, 1960, and once carried the name Ostrava, and later Piastani, stands in the Aviation Museum at Kbely on the edge of the capital. It was handed over back in 1979, and it is still there. In 2017, it was moved from a grass apron into the main exhibition, an operation that took an entire day and was filmed as an event in its own right. Another machine, the one named Karlovy Vary, spent many years parked beside a roadside campground and now lives in a private aviation park outside Pilsen. It was seen there in the summer of 2025, which, by historical standards, is essentially the day before yesterday. A third airframe has been serving as a roadside cafe next to a highway since 1986, and since 2011, it has worn the colors of a local soft drink. An airplane that logged 23,500 hours and completed 20,000 landings now advertises lemonade. The one that flew out last, on the 29th of January, 1990, sits in a German technology museum, where it was placed instead of being scrapped for metal. And now, the part that is hard to make up. One of the airframes was destroyed in 1984 during explosives testing. Another was bought by a film studio in 1981 and blown up for a television series. A third served as a restaurant from 1982, then stood beside a zoo and was eventually broken up. And not one, not a single one of the 12 was ever sold to another airline for flying work. They did not scatter across the world the way Soviet airframes did after the Union came apart. They stayed home. In a museum, at a campground, in the movies, in a cafe, in a scrapyard. Now, Warsaw. One An-24 stands as a monument at the entrance to a small town in the Opole region. Another, the very first one, the airframe named Wisla, went to the airport fire service after it was struck off charge. They practiced putting out fires on it. The Il-18, named Tobruk, became a roadside restaurant. Along its fuselage, they painted the words, "Departure, non-stop." In Polish, it is shorter, and it bites harder. But the most piercing fate of all fell to the airframe named Lenino. It was withdrawn in November of 1990. It had logged more than 28,000 hours. In February of 1991, its wingless fuselage turned up on the outskirts of Warsaw. A businessman had bought it to open a restaurant inside. Permission was refused. Unauthorized construction. So the fuselage was hauled to the enormous stadium where, in those years, a large open-air market operated and a bar was opened inside it. In September of 1995, it burned down. An airplane that spent 30 years flying to Cairo, Beirut, London, and Copenhagen ended as a bar at a flea market and burned to the ground. The era closed quickly. The On-24s were withdrawn from service in 1992, with the mass cancellation of registrations falling in January and February of that year. They were replaced by French and Italian ATRs, the first of which touched down in Warsaw on the 15th of August, 1991. 1966 to 1992. 26 years that coincide exactly with the boundaries of an entire epoch. In Prague, it happened even earlier, and this detail strikes me as more important than most. The decision to replace the long-haul fleet with a European airplane was taken in 1988, a year before everything. And it was motivated not by politics, but by the crisis in the Soviet aviation industry. The people making that decision were simply looking at the numbers. As for the Il-18s themselves, what pushed them out by then was neither wear nor metal fatigue. What pushed them out was size. First the smaller jets, and then a new medium-haul airliner for whose routes the Il-18 was simply too large. The machine was not retired by age. It was retired by a market that had changed shape. Let us go back to where we started, the 29th of January, 1960. 45 minutes to Bratislava, 80 people in the cabin, new equipment, a new era, and a country with 30 more years left to exist. The 29th of January, 1990. The same airfield, the same type, the final flight, and in the cargo hold, the manuals for an airplane nobody in that country had ever seen. Between those 2 days lie 30 years, 22 airframes across 2 countries, millions of passengers, 2 maintenance systems written by one and the same hand, and 2 completely different fates that came out of them. And here is the question I will leave with you. When you board an airplane, any airplane, today, in the year 2026, what is it that you are trusting? The factory that built it? The manual by which it is maintained? Or those few people you will never see? The technician who signed the form at 6 in the morning, the controller who will read you a distance, and the person in the left-hand seat who may one day have a matter of minutes to decide something that is written in no manual anywhere. Prague and Warsaw spent 30 years answering that question in their own ways, and both of them paid for their answer. Which one would you bet on?